Awesome. All right. Well, we are so lucky to have Maryse Mejier with her new novel, debut novel, The Seventh Mansion, here with us at Interabang Books for our author chat series. Maryse, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to say that I've been a huge fan of your work since the short story collection Heartbreaker, which I just kind of randomly stumbled upon and was hooked. And then I loved Rag, and I loved the novella Northwood. So I was super stoked to see that you were doing a novel here. And I didn't really know what to expect. I don't know if you knew what to expect when you started a novel, but here we are, published. It's out this Tuesday. We have it at the store. We've already had pre-orders, so get yours. There's the spiel. One thing that I look for as a reader, something that I'm not really necessarily concerned about so much as narrative all the time. I really like reading poetry, and I'm really drawn to short stories just for their sort of the briefness, because I like to hold on to something. I'm really about sort of the experience of reading more so than anything else. And that's what I feel like you've really accomplished with this work is I had a reading experience. Because and as people will read, you'll see the form of this is very, very different from anything I've read before. The way that the work is composed, it's working in so many levels. There's this jaggedness to it. There's fragmentation. There's pauses, and then all of a sudden these sentences are connecting and words are connecting in ways that they weren't about to, but then they do. I'm really interested in that aspect of this work. Do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes I think the subject matter of books, and in particular my work, becomes the focus of discussions, and so it's really nice to be asked a question about how something is written and how it sounds. So I was reading. I'm gonna forget her name. She's Maryse McBride. I was reading some of her work. Are you familiar with her stuff?
And yeah, she half-form thing.
Yes.
Yes.
She writes where she, it's a stream of consciousness where the punctuation reflects what's going on in the author's, in the character's head. And I really, I loved how she did it. I liked the way that the punctuation was interrupting the thought process, and then sometimes it would kind of run together. And the other person who really influenced me from the beginning is Kathy Koja. She did some really great speculative horror fiction in the 90s, and when I was 13 I started reading her stuff, and I just loved her stream of consciousness where she's like the opposite of McBride. Like she just like runs and goes and goes and goes, and everything's connected with dashes, and it's just like this like breathless pace. And I've always had that in the back of my mind as a writer, like that there's that Koja voice. And then I started reading Beckett in high school, which is like these really concise sentences and very spare and everything. And so for this book, I felt like in my previous work I had really focused on stripping everything out of a text. So just trying to be as like precise and as small as possible, and focusing more on an image or a feeling rather than the language itself. I didn't want the language itself to be visible in a certain way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I wanted like a certain distance in all of that other work, so that it really felt like you were watching somebody, but you weren't like, even if it was first person, I just wanted a sense of distance between the reader and the text. And then for this book, I just felt like right away as soon as I sat down, not knowing what I was going to write, except that it had something to do with the skeleton and this boy, the voice just came out, and it just was like even way more extreme than the way it is in the book now.
Really?
Periods everywhere. Like it was just, I had the sense that he had so much to say, and like so many feelings, but that in some ways he's very quiet. Like he hardly talks in the book. He doesn't say a lot of things. And so his inner world isn't necessarily very verbal either. It's more like, it's like all of these feelings, but then they're all bottled up. And so like, how do you get to that sense? And I just wanted to make the reader slow down and really be stuck inside this person. So instead of like most stream of consciousness books where it's propulsive, it moves really quickly, like with Koja, I wanted it to be like you're in a car and it's like constantly breaking on you. But then in certain parts, then it does the opposite, right? Like it gets much more lyrical, and those are like the romance parts, or, you know, when he's in the woods or whatever. So the contrast between this sort of constipated mindset that just, you know, everything's bottled inside, and these moments where he's so overwhelmed that he can't control the feelings, and he does let them out in a bad way or in a positive way when he's with his skeleton boyfriend.
And it's I think that's what makes this work so well. I think if the syntax wasn't as such, I don't think this would have been successful. And so I love it for that. And it makes me want to reread it for that reason, just alone. I'm glad that we could get away from the subject, because like you said, I feel like I see a lot of talk about your, you know, sort of controversial, taboo subjects, and that becomes like, it shadows everything else. And so now that we, you know, have to have the craft element, do you want to just briefly talk about the project so we're not speaking in just sort of abstract terms for anyone else listening?
Yeah, so we should talk about what it's actually about.
Yeah.
So, this is my first thing about the book, so you have me at my freshest and my least articulate in talking about this book. But it's probably,
I'm always like that, so it's perfect.
So I'll show you a picture of the of Saint Pancratius. He's beautiful. So my sister sent me a picture of him. I actually have that very picture. This is you see him?
Oh wow!
It's the relic of a saint. He was martyred a long time ago. It doesn't matter when. He probably never really existed. But the story goes that there was this boy, Pancratius. He was an orphan, and he was a Christian, and Diocletian wanted to convert him to Christianity. He refused. In several versions of the story, he has to go to an arena or on a road, and he's asked to sacrifice a lamb to prove, you know, like to kill Christ, basically, to prove that he believes in the Roman gods. And he refused to do it, and he was beheaded. And there are lots of different versions of the stories, and there are a lot of animals in those stories. Sometimes there's a panther or a lion that he's in the arena with that he's supposed to kill, that either he allows to kill him or he doesn't do anything, and then the Romans kill the animal in front of him. Anyway, I just saw this picture of Pancratius, and he's got this beautiful suit of armor, and he just looks kind of glorious. Like, he doesn't look like the way you expect a dead body skeleton look. So beautiful. So he was the inspiration. Years and years ago, I knew I wanted to write a book about this body, and I also wanted to write a book about necrophilia for a long time. And originally I wanted to write a book, a young adult book. I don't know why I had it in my head that it was going to be YA, but about a young person. And I'm actually not answering your question in the right order. I'll get to what the book is about. So the book is about this boy, Z. He's 15, 16 years old, and he is a vegan animal rights activist. And he moves to a small town in North Carolina. It's not named in the book, but that's where it is, with his father. And the house they live in is next to these woods, these birch woods, and he spends all of his time in the woods, and he loves these trees. And he gets kicked out of school because he gets in trouble for freeing some mink on a fur farm. So him and his friends go and they get all these animals out of the cages, and he's the one who gets caught. So he gets kicked out of school, and he is kind of left to his own devices. And one day when he's in the woods, he finds this tiny church, and inside is the skeleton, this body. And it's about him developing this relationship with the bones and the spirit of that saint, and about his relationship with the woods and with various people in his life. And yeah, what he does with his intense desire to try to save the world, really, in some ways, a world that he doesn't fit in at all, or so he thinks. So that's what it's about, I think.
Yeah. Now we got some context to work with. um, One thing that came to my mind was, and I don't mean to make this about me at all, but I
Please do.
I couldn't help but see myself in the character of Z.
So good.
And you know, I was about 17, 18 when I can't remember when I was, you know, sort of vegan. Um, and I started listening to just really heavy metal, screamo deathcore, and just trying to be an extreme version of whatever that was. And what I found in looking back, and I'm not saying that this is what the character does, but what I saw was it was myself. This was a coping skill for me,
Mm-hmm.
because I was at the time really struggling with my sexuality, not in the uh, same way. Let me just make that clear. But as a you know, a gay man, all that was going on inside of me, and I didn't really know what all those feelings were. But I realized now that I sort of built this sort of there was this sort of desire to have an extreme diet, listen to sort of this really fringe music, and try to protect something, because I think I wanted protection, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where all of it was coming from, is just me pushing people away. And that's how I sort of dealt with it. I'm not vegan anymore, but at the time, it did something for me. And I feel like in a way that's kind of what Z is sort of trying to. I think he is trying to find sort of some sort of control in his life, and that just resonated with me in that sense. I don't know if that's a thought that you had at all, or.
Yeah, for sure. I love that term, that it's self-protective. Like, you know, anything that we see as extreme, whether it's a diet or a political perspective, music, a way of dressing. Um, I in high school I dressed like I do now in black, and I also decided I wanted to be Catholic for some reason. Not growing up in a religious household, and my sister was vegan. I was vegetarian, and as I got older, you know, I found myself always trying to figure out, like, what's the best way to live, what's the right way to live, and you know, for a while it was, I'm still vegan as far as diet. In other ways I'm not. I wear leather and stuff like that, but I always felt like I was really sensitive, and I was vulnerable to the world in a certain way. And now looking back, when I was writing this book, I could see myself in Z as someone who did need that self-protection in some ways. Not because anybody was trying to, like, nobody in the book is like trying to hurt Z in specific. I really wanted to try to make it so that the threat to him isn't personal, and it's not from other humans. It's an existential threat that he feels about, like, the state of the world, you know. And it was the same in my life. Like, nobody was messing with me growing up. It was more like my anxieties about violence and about the things other people do to each other, and later in life, environmental stuff and animal stuff. So I think I tried to write a book that was more personal. Not that I am Z or any of these things happened to me, but personal in the sense that I wanted to write about someone who is really vulnerable in a lot of the ways that I guess I feel vulnerable, and who has a desire to live this, like, ultimately ethical life that's impossible to do because everything's fucked up. And you're all you know, we're so complicit in the systems of our own oppression, and on and on. So he was like this he's so extreme about that in every way. And so in some ways I made him as like an avatar, like, here's the saint, here's like the person who's trying to live as close to the earth as possible and as cleanly as possible. And he fails in certain ways, of course. but it was sort of a reminder to me, like, don't forget the ideals, like, even though it's really hard, like, don't give up on the quest. It doesn't have to be about eating a certain way. It doesn't have to be about not driving a car or whatever, but it's the intention to do the best that you can and to be as aware of other beings in the world, human, non-human, non-animal even. And a reader said recently, she said, you made a hero. And she said, you haven't done that before. You've never written about someone who can be seen as a hero. And that was really true. And it's interesting that when I picked up the book the other day, my sister, my twin, always says I have book dysmorphia. When like a book comes out, like I'll like try to read it and I'll be like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't make a literal sense. Like, what was I thinking? Like, you know, to hear you describe the way that it's written and how like that worked for you, it's a relief, because I look at it and I'm like, literally, this is just nonsense. Like, how is anybody gonna understand what I wrote? And also I felt very awkward about how emotional it is and how vulnerable the text itself is, which I usually, and you know, that distance that I'm usually operating in as a writer is very protective of me in a lot of ways. And this book, again, even though it's not about me, it was like I let myself be write about someone who's like so raw in some ways, and so who wants so much of like to be good. And I think to admit that you even care about that in a certain way is like very uncool. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Yeah, it's almost borderline like sentimental.
That's the word. It's like the book in some ways is a little sentimental, and it's like kind of over the top in so many ways, and it's just like, oh, you know, I remember like crying when I wrote it at certain points, and now I look back at that and it's just, I don't know if I like it.
Yeah.
But you know, my whole thing is like, I always want to write a book that scares me and that makes me really uncomfortable. And this book made me uncomfortable in that way. It was just like, I am a sentimental person, and sincerity is the most important thing to me. And I just let myself be really sincere in the text in a certain way. And you know, whether that works or not, I don't know. I'm not the one to judge it anymore. But I did feel really scared when I wrote it because of that.
It's I think it's hard to say sometimes, like, maybe this is me, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. As much as I've tried to create whatever it is that I want people to see, maybe this is me.
Maybe, yeah. And I think that like I've been accused so many times when I was younger of being a bleeding heart, you know, and that always bothered me because I wanted to be tough. And now after I wrote this, I'm like, no, I'm just like a wimp, just like a weakling. Like everything like is, you know, I mean, I'll watch like a Thai commercial and I'll cry because like the music is sad, or like the family, like, oh, families, like they're doing their laundry together and like the mom loves her daughter so much. Like, you know, I'm just a wimp, but I've always been that way. And I think my work is like, it's like tough in a certain sense, and I'm not. It's all a lie. It's all a front.
That's very vulnerable. I was always afraid of becoming a person that looked forward to like a Sunday barbecue. But that's it. You know what I mean? And I think I'm slowly becoming that person where that actually sounds like a really good time.
Yeah, not afraid to say it.
Yeah, yeah.
So can I ask you, what made you, when did you realize like all these things that you were doing were a sort of a way to protect yourself? Did you feel like you had to do it because nobody would protect you, and so you were kind of, you know, creating this persona? Or how did you come to kind of see it from the outside and kind of understand the motivations behind these things?
You know, I think I was so afraid of people seeing a true version of myself that I needed to repel them before they could even get close enough for that to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of awareness has come obviously after the fact. I don't think I knew I was doing that at the time. You know, it was also like participating in a lot of like self-harm and cutting and things like that. as a way, I think, as well, to push people away. If I seem sort of like an unstable and violent person, then I don't need to look at the softer sides, right? The sentimental stuff that actually is probably at the most raw of my emotion. I think it's easy to be an angry person.
Like that. I'm gonna write that down.
But write it down. I think it's so much more difficult to join humanity sometimes, to realize that maybe I'm just one of the whatever people that are just going to sort of go down in history for maybe nothing, right? And that's totally cool, but yeah, I can only see that after the fact, which is the case for a lot of things, and I still listen to a lot of music like that. Like there's actually a vegan band called Youth Code. I don't know if you're familiar with Youth Code at all. Youth Code. Yeah, they're a vegan duo. They do electronic and screamo together. They're super good.
I'm gonna definitely check that out.
Yeah, they're really good. But I don't know if that answered your question.
It did, yeah. Let me know if this is too personal, but in the book, it's like falling in love with Pancratius, changes me in a certain way. And so I'm wondering, like, when you first experienced romantic love, or it was reciprocated, did that help break open all of this stuff for you? Or did that, like, what role did romance play, do you think, in your...
Oh gosh. Well, I think my first experience of love, which I know you can really feel because it feels like you're sick, was really, really unhealthy and very codependent. And it's sort of like, that line between love and obsession. I'm not really sure where it is, right? Yeah. But what that did to me is it made me realize that's something I wanted, because that first feeling of love, of longing for someone and wishing they were here instead of, sort of preferring to be by yourself, is something I didn't know that I had. Mm-hmm. And so, I have the capacity for that. Maybe that hasn't happened again, but I know that that's something that can, I know it's something that I want to experience. And I think that sort of broke through to me, that I was desirable by someone as well, mm-hmm. right? Instead of just sort of whatever I thought that I was sort of trying to deny was there, or, that I might be an enjoyable person to have around. How critical we can be of ourselves, of course. But yeah, I think that I think that that's probably what happened with that first sort of experience.
And did that happen when you were young, or were you already?
I was 22, so I was starting an MFA. Super stoked for that. I was also, really struggling with drinking at the time. And I think that also put me in a position to sort of experience things in different ways, to really let my guard down in ways that otherwise sober me probably wouldn't have allowed. So in a way that was kind of good, that I was sort of unraveling. I dropped out of the program a couple days later because I just couldn't get my life together at the time. And so that whole experience is really messy when I think back on it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the tricky part is, I hate to say this, but I'll say it. Sometimes I don't know, was I so in love with him, or was I more in love with being drunk? Yeah. It's hard to admit, but it might be true.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
Alcohol is a really good friend.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, you think it is.
Yeah, and things sort of, things feel just so much more intense. But on all sides, right? Mm-hmm. Happiness, sadness, violence, whatever it is. But I don't know if love did that for you.
Well, it did in the sense that I'm an identical twin. So I think in some ways, twins are very lucky that they know what it's like to have a soulmate from the time that they come into the world. And
I
that
have
really,
twin sisters that are identical, and I get that side. I mean, I
yeah,
did it like you do, but you know what I mean? I've seen it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, so I think the love part, in some ways, it sets it up so that you already have this the most like intense connection you can have to another person, and there's no gap. There's no like, can another human being really understand me? I thought they knew me, but they didn't. Like, you don't experience that with your twin. I know what it's like to be her, but we're not the same person. Like, we have different views on things, not that many, but there are some differences. But I know what it's like to be me, and I also know what it's like to be my twin. And we don't have to be the same person for that to work. And so you're always looking in your life to repeat that model. And I think sometimes it can make you, it makes it harder to fall in love in that way. Like, I fall in love with people all the time, and I have a great like hunger for really intense friendships, and of course I love my husband very much, but it's almost like nothing can compare to the easiness of the kind of intense love that you have with your twin. So I'm not sure I've experienced the kind of love that you're talking about and that other people have, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
No. And so in my work, the reason why I write so much about relationships, and like usually with some kind of like fetishy or sexual thing, it's because I'm just really mystified by like how other people conduct their love lives, and like how people experience romance while also being really lonely. And loneliness is something that twins, I don't think, experience. I've certainly I don't know what it's like to feel alone. And it seems really scary, seems like horrifying. So I always wonder, like, what does it mean to be in love, or to be interested in someone, or attracted to someone, and to want to do things with them, but then at the same time not trust that they will know you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's why I write about those things, I guess.
I don't know that. I don't know the side you're talking about. You know, I guess. Yeah.
So it's like a mystery, like this kind of romantic love that has the fear of loss inside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think a lot of people feel like there's an initial period where like, oh, we love each other and everything's great, and then there's the like existential angst of like, we're two separate people and it's impossible. And I was, to go back to the book, I mean, the thing that I was interested in with necrophilia, which is not exactly what goes on in the book.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes it sound like someone having sex with like a body that they killed, that they dug up in a grave.
Rose for Emily type.
Yeah, yeah. It's
this
not
is not Faulkner. Yeah.
And we don't use that word, and I wouldn't use the word to apply it to Z, to the protagonist.
It's sweet.
It is sweet, right? It's like, you're like, I kind of want a skeleton boyfriend now.
I never thought that, but
that's the difference between you and me then.
There we go. Maybe on a second read, a third read. Yeah.
But the body, like the bones, you know, it's dead. Like, it's a dead body, I guess. It's hard when you don't think of flesh. I was like thinking about this so much when I was writing the book. Like, what makes a skeleton really different than like a corpse? I can't get behind the corpse thing. Sorry to other people.
You're really disappointing several people.
Just gonna do it. Yeah. But when I saw this picture, I was like, there's something extremely like fetishy and sensual about the way that body is presented, and the way that Catholics treat these bodies in general. But anyway, I had been in part of this online support group, a paraphilia support group, initially for a different purpose, which I won't talk about here because it's a little involved. But there was a corner of that site that was for necrophiliacs, and I remember like popping in there and being like, "Hey, what's this all about? Like, what's going on?" And these are all,
that was your opening comment?
What's that?
Was that your opening comment?
It was something that like, hi, please explain this to me. A lot of people knew me. I was like a co-moderator.
Okay.
Another corner of the site. I fancied myself like I was really wise about a lot of these things and like wanted to help people or something, which is not a good idea. But I could sort of understand like all the fetishy stuff and all the other stuff on there, but I couldn't understand the necrophilia thing. And these are all people, they're all like mostly young people who of course never like been with a dead body, like, because it's hard to get them. It wasn't about like, it wasn't necessarily sexual for, as I interpreted it for most of the people. It was romantic. It was this idea that like, oh, I walked through this graveyard and there's a tombstone for this girl who died in like 1905, and like, you know, it's this whole fantasy of this person that's forgotten by everybody else, that nobody else would ever think of this being that exists in your brain as a potential friend or lover or whatever. And what I kept hearing these people say was just like, oh, it's just this feeling that you have that you can't describe, that you sense a presence. Or so it wasn't so much about the absence of life, but a sense that these people had, that they were extra sensitive to the livingness of these bodies that they couldn't even see most of the time, that other people didn't have. And I thought that was really fascinating, that it's like, okay, it's not about fetishizing the objectness of the body, but it's about feeling that the body still exists, or that the spirit is there, and it's the spirit that you can connect with. And then I was like, okay, I get that, because that's what like every human wants. And then like capitalism comes in, and patriarchy, and they're like, you know, every being as an object, and so, you know, then people get really fucked up. But yeah, at one point I was like, you know, I guess we're all sort of necrophiliacs in some way. That's another topic. But I had thought for a long time, after I spoke with these people, that someday I wanted to they would always say like, there are no books about necrophiles that like at all describe what we experience or what we feel or what we want. And I thought that was sad. I was like, there should be a book that talks about this, but I didn't know how I was going to do that until my sister sent me that picture. And then I was like, okay, I get it.
I can get it. Yeah.
Do that. But then I didn't know who would fall in love with that body. So it took another couple years to find the partner for the ideal partner for the skeleton. But I love that idea of like, wow, it's not about death. It's not about being in love with death or violence. These people are not, nobody on there I ever spoke to was violent, wanted to harm anybody or killing, nothing like that, which is how we think about necrophilia. Or like people work in morgues or something, and they're like, that does not interest me at all.
Yeah, I mean, there's no Jeffrey Dahmer here.
No, there's no Jeffrey Dahmer. Yeah. And it's really about like, wanting to find that little corner of the world that is neglected by everyone else, and that's really lonely. And these people feeling really lonely, feeling like nobody understands us, or nobody could understand us, nobody could love us if they knew who we were. And I think like 90% of the population feels that way, you know. Whatever you are, I think most people feel that they're deviant on the inside in some way. Even if you're, you know, a straight white guy who likes girls, there's probably something that you feel like there's something wrong with you because of something that you think or feel or want. And so I kind of get frustrated when people talk about my work as if it's like this extreme thing, or it's like I'm trying to like this like shock value, because it's never been about that at all. It's, to me, it's all kind of the same as, you know, writing about, I don't know, suburban middle-aged people.
The truth about it is, you know, everyone talks about like, oh, you write about the everyday, but as you just mentioned, this is the everyday for someone.
Yes, exactly, for somebody out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If people would just not be so afraid to look at things, you know, I don't know.
It's just, I don't know
like, how many people do that. But
if you ever like talk to a friend or another human being and really had a deep conversation with them, like at some point you're going to hit on something where like there's just some deep trough of like self-hatred or deep fear or existential loneliness or angst or anxiety or depression, and there, then there's many beautiful and wonderful things that people keep secret as well. And people often interpret the work as if the extreme elements, or the dark, I hate that word dark, the dark elements are metaphors. And I always say everything in my work is literal. I mean, you don't need to add metaphors. Like, metaphors exist. They're going to be there because your brain does that. I don't need to do it. But like, if somebody, in Heartbreaker, there's a story about the fox at the
the cheat.
It's the cheat. They're like, the fox symbolizes blah blah. I don't even know. And I'm like, no, she actually just like having sex with the fox.
Yeah.
Like, the fox. He represents himself in the book, and she's in love with an animal. It's not like the animal standing in for all of masculinity or whatever. But you can, of course, you can read it that way, and there's like that layer is going to be there no matter what, because we live in the political context that we do. So I don't need to fake it or hide anything you know what I mean? I'm not like, here's a little clue. It's really about like Cheerios, but I put it in a Cocoa Puff, and like, then you have to like wash off the Cocoa Puff to get to the Cheerios. Like, no, like, it is what it is.
Yeah. What was that movie? Sharknado. That's a big,
Not like that.
But it's, I mean, obviously it's something it bothers you to be read, for real, to be read that way over and over and over.
I mean, it bothers me intellectually, I would say. It doesn't bother me emotionally, because I understand why it happens, and people are free to talk about the work however they want. I mean, that's the great privilege of being a reader, and the joy of being a writer is to hear what other people have to say. But I think there's a fear that if like the critic or the reader doesn't come up with some like thesis about what the work is about, aside from what it seems to be about literally, then you're not like thinking deeply enough, or you're not being critical enough. And there's a fear of taking certain types of things literally, I think. Like, what if it really is just about this thing? It's just like with the fox, like, then you have to think about like, what does it mean to have sex with an animal or fall in love with an animal? And that's troubling, I guess, for some people. So it's easier actually to think that it's just a representation of something else, rather than
this could never happen.
Or it doesn't happen. And that's the other criticism, is that it's not realistic. The work is not realistic, and it's just like a fantasy, and so it's not valid, or you can't relate to it.
Not realistic.
I know, whatever. It's totally realistic. Shut up.
Who's saying that? Why is that even important?
It's important to some people. I don't know.
I guess so.
There's the kind of person who wants to relate to the text directly. They don't want to relate to it if it might mean something weird or scary about who they are. I think my work is probably self-selective on some level. So most people who get a certain way through the book are going to be like, okay, I'm either on board with this or not. But
I don't recommend it to everybody. I like in my job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I got a bad review as a bookseller because I recommended a book called Bear by.
Oh yeah, I haven't read it.
Engel.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And it was just the feedback was bad, but what do you do?
Yeah, I was a bookseller for 8 years, and that happened to me sometimes too. Yeah. Usually, when I
would say, you were talking about sort of the intimacy with the body, and I think those were the best parts of the book. The way that you wrote those was just those were the dog-eared pages, for what it's worth.
Thank you.
And like you said, it's not necessarily about sort of that physical, that touch. You have this great line that turn me to gold too, and that's really that sort of presence and that spirit sort of coming through. So I thought it was some of those were just really sexy lines. And I thought that was the strength there, was those parts. It seems like you enjoyed writing those.
I did. I worked really hard to imagine them fully, I guess.
Yeah.
Convince myself, like, okay, if I was this person, like what would be sexy or what would be romantic about this moment? Because yeah, I don't want to have sex with a skeleton.
Yeah.
But if I did,
Yeah.
but even beyond that, thinking like, what is erotic or what is sexy in general, like about being intimate with someone, and trying to make it specifically about bones, because that's the body, like trying to honor the body that's in the text, and to not, like, I have this obsession with not like betraying the characters or using them or making fun of them or like shaming them, or I hate that. I don't want to ever do that. And so I just want it to be honest in a certain way and like specific, and say like, yes, I'm looking at a body that is not an infleshed body, and that should be honored in the text. But then also thinking like, it's also just a universal experience that people have. It's just like when you feel really connected to something, whether it's a forest or it's an animal or it's the body of the person that you love, we all know what that's like, I think.
Yeah.
Or hopefully, or we
I
all.
hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna just switch gears here real quick, because the language is, the book is composed in such a way, as we mentioned with the syntax, that there's this experience with nails throughout the book. And I really felt, sort of that mirroring with the syntax as well. That cadence is definitely there. And
I didn't know about that. That's good.
yeah, and I think that the language feels, there's a physicality to the language. But it's in contrast to that, where we're talking about extreme, I'm tired of using the word extreme, environmental activism and animal activism, or any sort of activism, right? There's this, there's like two paths, which is language. Okay, I'm going to, and in here at a protest, there's a speech given, and the audience is sort of like ignoring it, right? There's that part. And then there's sort of the action. Let's just, the action is going to work. And I as much as people say, peaceful protesting, go through legislation, sign petitions, the language component of it, the signs and everything, it just sometimes just doesn't feel like enough.
Yeah.
And you're working with language as a medium here. I mean, is that enough? I don't know. Probably not. Sometimes it is, but I don't know. I don't know how I feel about people burning down whatever, destroying property. But what else are you supposed to do at some time? I don't know. So language and action, sort of, where do they play as far as you see with actually change happening?
I just love what you said so much, and I have not articulated that to myself in as elegant a way as you did. It brings tears to my eyes a little bit. Thank you very much for reading it that way and seeing that in it. I think exactly what you're saying is something that's in the work that maybe I haven't even thought about in a long time or ever fully articulated. But I think it reflects my own sense of futility with language. Like, that's what I have. Like, I'm a failed activist. Like, when I became a vegan, I really wanted to, so I signed a lot of petitions and I held signs outside of the circus, PETA did win that fight. It was good. But when I was at those places, I would just cry. I would just cry. If I was, I just felt like, this is like, what is it really doing to like ask people to like hand out literature and like to ask people to listen to you, if they can't already see it, right? And that's how Z feels in the book. It's just like, he doesn't only see it, like he feels it in his body. Like, if you do something to his trees, if you do something to these mink, like for him, he doesn't distinguish his body from the body of nature. or he doesn't want to. It's not like he feels like he's at one with nature at all. He's actually an outsider, right? It's not like he's this nature guy who like understands the language of the water or whatever, like, and he hates that, like that he wants this sort of intimacy with nature that he feels like civilization has stolen from him. And for me, it's like I'm not brave enough to live according to my ideals in the way that I think is really right, that I know in my heart is right. Like, I shouldn't live in this apartment. I don't drive, but like I probably shouldn't even get on a bus. I shouldn't ever buy things with money. You know what I mean? Like, money's horrible. I shouldn't participate in capitalism at all. I should be putting my body out there as on the line, right, to help protect other people, to help protect the earth. It sounds ridiculous to say that, but I think Z is right. I think these extreme activists, I think ethics is on their side, but I also see that it's just to take those paths is to cut yourself off from the life that you know, and to cut yourself off from the community usually that you're a part of. And I'm also a communitarian anarchist, and I think community is like the most important thing that we have. And I'm not a lone wolf. Like, I don't see myself as like a person who can act on her beliefs by herself. And I've never found a group of people outside of my sister and my brother-in-law who we all think pretty much the same way in our anarchism. But I don't feel like I belong in these other groups that I try to be a part of. And I found myself, I wasn't ready, or I didn't want to do the kinds of direct actions that they were doing, and maybe that's because I suck. Maybe that's because I'm afraid to give up my privilege. All of those things are really true. And when I was writing this book, I was trying to tell myself, I'm using language like this is the skill that I have, and I'm using it to do something. But I agree with your question in the sense of like, is it enough? I don't know, and writing the book did not answer that question for me. I don't think the book is enough. I don't think to write about these ideas and hopefully to make other people think about them or confront them, I don't think it's good enough. But it's a part of it, right? And I think in the book, it's a book about people who are trying to figure out how many parts go together to make a whole, I do think that like humanity is doomed. I think that we will die and then we'll face extinction in the next 100 years probably. It's like just a hard limit of climate stuff. But I'm really optimistic. I'm not like Z in the book. I don't have like a dark view of the world or of people. I like people as much as I like trees.
It's like you open the book with Galway Canal, and it's a very hopeful set of lines.
I see that way. Yeah.
I love, I mean, he's gone now, but I love him so much. Yeah. I was happy.
I was just looking at that epigraph on my computer the other day, and I was like, people are just, does that set this downer tone? And you said, no, it's very hopeful. And that's how I read it.
Very hopeful.
The book, I mean, when I was writing it, I felt hopeful in the end or whatever about what happens, but it'll be interesting to see how other people read it. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to think more about this action versus, it's kind of like the bane of my existence right now. It's like trying to figure out if me being a writer at all is somehow self-protective in a certain way. Like I think artists sometimes feel insulated by their art. They're like, I spend all my time doing this great thing that seems so great. And I do think like art is like necessary for human survival, but is my art necessary for human survival? I don't know. Or could I be spending my time doing something that's actually more meaningful in the time that I have on the earth? I don't know.
Well, I know a writer friend that said, me writing books is never going to feed anyone, right?
No,
you can't really eat that. Well, you could eat this, but I don't know what kind of nourishment you get. But I've also heard another poet, Ted Kooser, that says, when I'm writing, there's one less scoundrel in the world. You can't build a bomb while you're writing.
Okay, I like that. All right.
I don't know if it does anything, but yeah.
You could be Ted Kaczynski and you could be like building bombs and writing at the same time. Which, I don't know. I thought about him a lot when I was writing this book, and, I feel like he was so right about technology. and it's sad that he chose to do what he did. But the frustration I understand, and I put a lot of his frustration, I think, in Z, that sort of like, I see this thing, right? These people who feel like they're visionaries, like they see web, right? That is like of destruction, and it has nothing to do with who's the president, what democracy is. It's beyond that. It's deeper than that. It's something that like, who gives a shit? Because, you know, we've been destroying the earth regardless of it's a Republican or a Democrat. Like at that point, it's not, that's a distraction. That's the circus that we put all our energy to, and being like, which box I'm going to check off on this piece of shitty paper. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't want to get into that. It's an unpopular opinion, but I think it's like, we've been running out of time for a long time.
Yeah, and beyond it.
I do believe like we need much more direct action than our form of democracy can provide. And like, as I think this is in the book, the girls, Z's friends are watching that video of the guy being arrested by the police, and one of the characters says like, they think that we're the terrorists. Did that make it in the book? Yeah. Okay.
It did.
And it's true that like the people at the top of the you know, Homeland Security terrorists, #1 dangers to America, are environmental activists.
Yeah, eco-terrorism.
Yeah, that's the scariest thing, because it's private property. Like that's the thing we're most scared of, is destruction of private property.
Yep.
I think, you know, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, like you are a liberal with, you know, capital L, like you believe in liberalism, you've been steeped in the values of liberalism, which are connected to this notion that humans are separate from each other inherently, and we should own things, and the government's just there to help you own shit and to keep other people. And if you're trying to live a life that like takes into account non-human things, it's impossible under this system. You just can't do it. You can't make laws that say like, oh, tree is actually important to like the well-being of other creatures, so we should protect the life of that thing.
And laws and morality don't necessarily go together.
Right? No, exactly. It's not the same thing, which we often mistake them for the same thing. We expect laws to do the work that we need to do with each other and for each other, and for all the other beings out there. So I don't know how we got off on that, but I'm glad we did.
Yeah, right? We're coming up on the hour here. Is there anything else you want to discuss or say? Because I've really enjoyed talking with you.
I know, the hour went by too so fast.
It's been so easy and so fun.
I know, it's like the best event that I've ever done. We talked about real things instead of like,
a huge event.
Where did you get, you know, I hate the questions we get asked.
I know. I wish I could, I should have asked you those.
No. Thank you. Okay, what do I want to say? I guess I was thinking today about kinship, and how that is something that was really important to me when I was writing this book, and important to me in life. And I feel like the focus of my ethics as a person has always been like, expanding this notion of who's no longer an other to me, right? Who's like my twin, basically. It's like, how do I make the rest of the world my twin? And what writing this book made me think about when I was reading about all the climate change stuff and environmentalism, so I had spent my life really thinking about people and animals, but not about other things like rocks and streams and you know, nature. I feel like there's no good word for the world. Like if you say like the earth or nature, it just makes you sound ridiculous, because people, do you know what I mean? Like the things that are attached to humans speaking those words, it's just like unpleasant to most people when they hear that. Just like, what a, you know, tree hugger or whatever. But it's like how do you get to the deeper sense of what you know, most cultures, indigenous cultures, understand, right? When you live close to the earth, you feel that everything is alive. And that's true. I don't know how people can argue that that's not true. But when I was writing this book, it was just a sense of like, where have I directed my sense of kinship in my life, and how can I just constantly try to unpick that, like the hierarchy that we all have of being, I guess. Like you know, there's humans, there's animals, and then anything after that is probably meaningless to most of us. But what are the ways in which I have like betrayed myself in not seeing the hierarchy that I have and that I follow for what it is? And so I guess I just hope when people read the book that it just is like this little nudge of thinking, like just looking around yourself and just seeing the potential connection or relationship with things that are not human but still living. And yeah,
I think that's beautiful. Yeah. And I'm already reconsidering things after this, for real, you know, all jokes aside, you know. So it's starting
a revolution.
But yeah, so yes, please grab your copy, Seventh Mansion. It's out this Tuesday. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was wonderful talking to you.
Likewise.